Outback Stories celebrates the pioneering spirit of Australia. It makes little difference if your family came on the First Fleet or on a leaky boat last week. Our unique national identity was born and bred in the Outback. These are your stories.
The name Sidney Kidman is firmly stamped into the history and mythology of the Australian outback. It is a pioneering story bound by determination, luck, pluck, and an exceptional, almost uncanny knowledge of the outback and the changing and challenging Australian physical and economic climate. 100 years ago, most Australians, particularly those in the bush, knew the name of Sidney Kidman and of his accomplishments as Australia's cattle king.
Sidney Kidman was born at Black Hill in South Australia in 1857, at a time when Australia had been turned upside down by the gold rushes. He was 6 months old when his father died, and he had to set his own form for the rest of his life. At age 13, he bought a horse for 50 shillings and he set out for New South Wales, and the rest is history.
Passing through what is now Broken Hill, he headed for Mount Gipps Station, where he took a job as a station hand and jackaroo at 10 shillings a week. He must have been a quick learner, for 2 years later he moved to a better job at £1 a week at Poolamacca Station as a boundary rider and stockman. Whilst most men would have been content to stay in the saddle, young Sidney Kidman saw the ruggedness and challenges of the outback as opportunity. When severe drought hit the Central West, and with commodity prices soaring, Kidman realised a more reliable income could be made as a carrier carting supplies. So he left Poolamacca and invested his savings in a bullock team and wagon. He began working for himself as a carter. Broken Hill, established in 1883, was booming with one of the world's richest deposits of silver, lead and zinc. Kidman recognised above all miners had to eat and opened a butcher's shop. In truth, it was nothing more than a lean-to with some meat hooks, and a delivery service to cater for the growing population. A quick dash to hometown Adelaide saw him purchase 60 horses, return to the barrier, sell them at a tidy profit, and immediately buy another mob from Burke and sell them. In 1884, Kidman made what looked like the deal of the century when he bought 1/14th share in Silverton Mine in exchange for 10 store bullocks. Reckoning he had already doubled his money for the sale, he soon sold his share for a £40 profit. In retrospect, it probably wasn't a wise decision, as Silverton became BHP, and his share today would be over $1 billion. One suspects, at the time, Kidman didn't think twice about selling his shares. He had other fish to fry. In looking at Kidman's life story, it is impossible not to be impressed with his business acumen. He seemed to be everywhere and rarely missed an opportunity. If opportunity was absent, he'd still find it. Even more remarkable was his ability to memorize his accounts. For many years he kept all his financial dealings in his head, and reputedly knew exactly how many cattle, sheep and horses were on his properties, their value and the size of the runs. Joining with his brother Sackville Kidman, he established S. Kidman & Co. as wholesale and family butchers. Sackville managed the office, while Sidney knocked down deal after deal, including diversifying into a mail coach service. After winning the mail contract, he immediately sold the coach service for a profit, and, he was fond of explaining, without putting a single horse on the road. It is obvious Sid knew the ways of the bush, and especially the importance of water. By the age of 22, he had been through the central floodplain country and realised if you had an interest in or controlled a large number of cattle stations along the river system and creeks of the floodplain, you'd do okay. That proved to be a whopping understatement, as S. Kidman & Co. set out to purchase vast rural holdings until it was claimed Kidman owned more land in the British Commonwealth than any other individual. He had earned his prize mantle of the Cattle King. In 1887, he joined with James Nicholas to establish a coaching service to break the Cobb & Co. monopoly. Operating out of Perth, Nicholas and Kidman's Cobb & Co. eventually became the second largest coaching service in Australia. James Nicholas, once a Cobb & Co. driver, handled the business, while Kidman handled the all-important livestock. Midst all of Sidney Kidman's wheeling and dealing, he managed to marry, raise a family, and have a life. It is clear his passion for the outback never varied and never waned. Even after the unexpected death of his brother from peritonitis in 1899, he did not slow down. When a devastating 3-year drought commenced in 1900, Sidney Kidman saw opportunity where others saw nothing but despair. By this stage, he had amassed 17 stations, but with entire herds of stock perishing, he continued to push against despair. He sold his interest in Cobb & Co., sold Owen Station, took a deep breath, and gave firm instructions to his station managers: make the place pay, feed the men, and allow no waste. As the drought broke, he went on another buying spree, which lasted for another 25 years. He once joked that his philosophy was, if you don't own it, buy it. If you own it, sell it. His voracious appetite for buying and selling rural property knew no boundary fence, and, if obstructed, he'd find a way to jump over the fence or tear it down. It was even said at one stage that he was interested in purchasing the entire colony of Victoria as a cattle and sheep station, but decided it was a bit too small for his liking.
One campfire yarn recounted how Sir Sid attended the Brisbane cattle sales and accidentally dropped his wallet in Queen Street, and it was so heavy it took 2 shearers and a roustabout to lift it off the pavement.
There was some criticism surrounding purchasing properties brought to their knees by the drought, but the Pastoralists' Review of 1903 commented, "The cattle king knows a lump of ground just as he knows the difference between a fat bullock and a giraffe. He stepped in and he did the business." He was also accused of ruining the back country near the Darling, where he replaced sheep with cattle. Although he ran sheep on some of his stations, he openly described them as jolly little monkeys.
Mind you, his dislike came from the fact he didn't like paying excess wages, and sheep demanded 20 men when 3 could handle cattle.
One suspects his indefatigable energy for making deals, establishing new businesses, and being away in the scrub made it difficult to track him, let alone fence him in. It was a time when bankers took a man on their word, and Sidney Kidman never failed them. In 1907 he said, "My ambition is not to be rich, but to hold the largest herd of cattle in Australia, if not the world, and the same with horses." He was true to his word.
We bought store bullocks cheaper this year than ever I bought them. I've been in the cattle business, I think, 40 years. Sheep, they're pretty cheap, but they're holding their own fairly well because the wool you always get the wool off of them. But the rabbits are on the increase very, very fast. The rabbits has reduced the carrying capacity of all practically Australia, especially out in the interior, 50% or more. They don't only eat all the best of the herbage and grass, but they bring all the nice young mulga and ring barks of many trees and kill them.
Well, it's good to see the horses selling so well, isn't it?
The horses are selling remarkably well, and the horse is the farmer's friend, because a horse you haven't got to buy petrol and oil to keep it going, spare parts. It's always ready to go as long as you give it a bit of grass. And the farmers produce enough grass and hay and other stuff to keep their horses.
There is no doubt Sidney Kidman knew about cattle and horses. He was an exceptionally good rider, including wild bucking broncos. He was a regular at the sales, whether buying or selling. The Adelaide Register newspaper said, "Kidman knows beforehand what every beast is worth to the shilling. He knows the value of every hair on their hides." Dressed in his customary grey-blue suit, felt hat turned up at the back, he looked like a wiry bushman with eyes that had absorbed the weird and strange light of the outback. He was recognised as a jovial ringmaster at the sales, friendly, casual, and yarning between his familiar call of "Knock 'em down!"
What am I offered? 21. Right. 21 and a half. Right, gentlemen, we will go to the next bed.
He is quoted as saying, "A man who never made a mistake never made anything else." Knighted in 1921, he remained down to earth, and whether in the city or bush, Kidman was known for talking bullock.
Bullock for breakfast, bullock for dinner, bullock for supper, sheep and horses in between meals, and, if there was a lull in the conversation at any time, even in the middle of the night, he was always willing to talk bullock again.
In 1928, Sidney Kidman and his son-in-law, Sidney Reed, as company shareholder and general manager, took an epic trip by rail and car to inspect their properties. Kidman had the foresight to buy a movie camera for Reed to capture their escapades and provide a rare archival record of the outback. On the occasion of his 75th birthday in 1932, Sidney Reed organised a celebratory rodeo at Jubilee Oval, Adelaide. Many of Kidman and Co.'s leading riders and horses displayed their skills. Expecting 5,000 people, the organisers were astounded when nearly 50,000 people came to pay their respects to the Cattle King and the empire he had built. In depression-gripped 1933, the elderly Kidman, accompanied by his son, Walter, made a passionate plea of hope, reminding us that farmers are the backbone of Australia.
I want to wish the farmers all good luck and all sorts of prosperity, because they're the backbone of the country.
Sir Sidney Kidman died in 1935, aged 78.
Acknowledging his early days, it's difficult not to look at the man as restless. He was always travelling, always looking for opportunity. He soon learnt to work with the bush rather than against it. His fortune was built on gambling, not with cards or frivolous pursuits, but gambling against nature. He had to gamble against the odds and work with the country, never against it.
Sidney Kidman's story is one of a self-made man, and that's something Australians have always respected. His legacy, S. Kidman & Co., remains at the forefront in Australian rural achievement.